My husband and I never imagined returning after a vacation and discovering our precious vintage car, left abandoned next to some trash bins on the street, paint peeling in patches, interior moldy from rain and wind. When I asked, my parents said, "My younger sister Kinsley's new car deserves the garage more." And they said our car was just a heap of scrap metal. I stood motionless. When I placed the purchase invoice in front of them, they trembled because of the car's actual price. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about a vintage car. It's the declaration of a woman. I will not allow anyone to trample on my worth ever again. My name is Julia. I'm 29 years old, and I live with my husband, James, in a town called Oceanside, San Diego, where the rumble of vintage car engines echoes through the streets every Sunday morning. James and I met in our freshman year of college, and perhaps what made us fall so deeply in love wasn't just love itself, but a shared passion. Classic cars. To us, cars weren't just a mode of transportation. They were memories, freedom, something almost sacred. Our shared dream, ever since we were students selling sandwiches at fairs, was to one day own a 1967 Mustang GT 500, the same model that appeared in an old photograph of my grandfather, where he stood in the middle of a wheat field, one hand resting on the car's hood, beaming with joy. We saved for 5 years. No dining out, no traveling, no designer shopping, all so that one day, when we saw the car listed at a reputable garage in Arizona, we wouldn't hesitate to sign a $150,000 check. The first time we drove the Mustang home, my heart pounded like I was falling in love all over again, and James gripped the steering wheel as if he were afraid to lose a treasure. That car wasn't just a product of our hard work. It was a living relic connecting me to the grandfather who had passed away, the only man in my family who ever taught me what it meant to be steadfast. To celebrate, we decided to take a long vacation to Phu Quoc, Vietnam, a place of turquoise seas, white sand, and dazzling sunsets I had always dreamed of. But one worry held us back. Leaving the Mustang in our old garage for 2 weeks made us uneasy, especially since there had been a few rare car thefts in our area. After some thought, we called my parents, Ryan and Savannah, to ask if we could store the car in their garage. They agreed rather quickly. Before we left, James carefully placed wooden blocks under the wheels to prevent moisture damage, and I covered the car with 2 specialized tarps, firmly reminding them that this wasn't just a car. It was our heart. I still remember as I shut the garage door, turning back for one last look. The Mustang lay still, as if sleeping in the arms of family, and I boarded the plane feeling at peace, never imagining that when I returned, my heart would shatter in the very place I thought was safest. The trip to Phu Quoc was truly the most beautiful time James and I had ever spent together. We wandered through night markets filled with laughter, watched the sea at sunrise, and sat for hours on the beach just talking about our future plans, in which the Mustang was always a part. I even shared some photos of the trip in our family group chat, though no one responded except for a half-hearted like from my mother. It stung a little, but I didn't dwell on it. Not until the day we came home. Our plane landed on time. We were tired, but excited. We decided to stop by my parents' house first, mainly to thank them for taking care of the car, and also because we wanted to drive the Mustang home that very afternoon. But as soon as we turned onto that familiar street, James suddenly slowed down, frowning. "Julia, look." I leaned over the window and saw it immediately. Our Mustang, dragged out to the curb, abandoned next to a few garbage bins, one side brushing against a tree, and the protective tarps we had tied down so carefully. Gone. The midnight blue paint was peeling in patches, revealing blotchy silver underneath. The hood was stained with dried mud. Rain had seeped through the windows, soaking the premium leather interior. now wrinkled, torn, and moldy. I stepped out of the car, feeling as though my feet no longer touched the ground. James ran over to open the Mustang's door, but it was jammed, probably swollen from the damp. I stood there, suspended between a nightmare and reality. The world seemed to tilt. My heart raced, not from anger, but from a betrayal so deep it was beyond words. We knocked on the door. My mother answered, wearing an absent-minded look of surprise, as if we had just woken her from a peaceful dream. "Oh, you're back early," she said. Then called into the house, "Kinsley, your sister's home." I couldn't speak for several seconds. James was the first to find his voice. "Where's our car?" he asked, trying to stay calm. My mother blinked, then replied casually, "Oh, we had to clear the garage for Kinsley. She just got a new car." Kinsley walked out, smoothie in hand, taking a sip before speaking lightly. "My new Audi A5, did you see it? It just fits the house's vibe better. That old Mustang looked like scrap metal." I stared at her. No apology, no explanation, and my parents, the two people I thought would understand, just stood there, cold, as if everything they did had been perfectly reasonable. What I felt then wasn't a single betrayal. It was every time I had ever been dismissed throughout my childhood, now rising all at once like a wave, drowning every last ounce of reason I had left. I tried not to cry on the doorstep. Not because I wanted to be strong, but because I knew that if a single tear fell, my entire body would collapse with it. James stood behind me, his hand clenched, while I swallowed hard, staring straight at my parents. "So, you dragged our car out into the rain, with no cover, just because Kinsley got a new car?" I asked, each word tearing through my throat. My mother crossed her arms and shrugged. "That thing looked awful. It ruined the aesthetic of the yard, and it's not like it's anything valuable." I blinked, again, as if to confirm I hadn't misheard. Kinsley gave a soft chuckle and turned to James. "You're not mad, are you? It's just a car. You guys are overreacting." I turned to James. His eyes were locked on the tiled floor, jaw clenched. I knew he was furious, and if he spoke now, everything might explode. I reached for his arm and gave it a gentle squeeze. "James, let me." He looked at me, nodded, and stepped back. I took a deep breath. That car is not just a car. It's an irreplaceable keepsake we saved 5 years to afford. It's my last memory of my grandfather. It's dedication, sacrifice, love, and you dumped it by the trash like it was nothing. My father finally spoke, his voice low but defensive. "Sweetheart, don't exaggerate. It was just moved out temporarily. We didn't expect a storm." I nodded slightly, bitterly. "Then did you expect I'd be this hurt?" Kinsley shrugged and turned away, as if the conversation no longer interested her. "And me?" I stood there for a few seconds, then turned toward the door. James had walked ahead, now standing by the Mustang, still lying there, silent, damaged, like an open wound on a trampled pride. I walked over, knelt beside the car, and gently ran my hand over a crack in the body. My fingers came away wet, but I couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. I don't know how long I sat beside the Mustang. The rain had stopped, but moisture still clung to the windows, reflecting my face, pale, battered by things no one would admit. James sat beside me in silence. He always did, never saying much, but always there when I needed him. Finally, I stood up, brushed off my dirty hands, and said softly, "I need to get something from inside." James nodded. No questions asked. I walked back into the house I had lived in for nearly 20 years, once thought of as a home, now suddenly so unfamiliar it chilled me. Kinsley was no longer in the living room. My mother was pouring tea as if nothing had happened. My father sat reading the paper, a habitual retreat whenever he wanted to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. I headed straight to my old room, opened the worn wooden wardrobe. In the third drawer, I pulled out a thin file, sealed in a plastic sleeve, a copy of the purchase agreement, receipts, photos of the Mustang before the damage, and an appraisal report from the insurance company. I hadn't planned on bringing it all out, but I needed them to see the truth, in black and white. Back downstairs, I placed the file on the tea table and slid it toward my father. I want you to read this carefully. This isn't some worthless old car. This is an asset, a real investment, and more than that, it's a piece of my life. My father didn't react, but my mother frowned, glancing from the papers to me. So what, you want us to do something? I looked her straight in the eye, for the first time in a long while. I don't know yet, but I won't let this go like all the other times. I turned to my father. I don't need an apology. I need you to understand and take responsibility. No one said a word for several seconds. No more pouring tea. No more rustling newspaper. Only the ticking of the old wall clock, marking the invisible distance between people of the same blood. I turned and walked out. The door shut behind me with a faint click. But I knew. It was the first sound in a long confrontation I would no longer back down from. The next morning, I returned to my parents' house, not with emotions, but with preparation. James drove, silent, the entire way. We arrived just as Kinsley stood by the gate in yoga clothes, holding a matcha latte. She glanced at me and turned away, as if she still saw nothing wrong with everything that had happened. I walked in without greeting anyone, heading straight for the living room where my parents were having breakfast. I didn't wait for an invitation. I placed a thick envelope on the table and began taking things out one by one. This is the official restoration and maintenance certification from the authorized workshop. This is the insurance valuation. This is the sales invoice from the vintage Mustang dealership. Value of the car, $150,000. I lifted my head and looked them straight in the eye. How much was Kinsley's Audi? $48,000? My father put down his spoon, frowning. My mother frowned too, but said nothing. Kinsley walked in at that moment, raising an eyebrow. What do you mean, 150 grand? Are you joking? I gave a soft laugh, not from amusement, but regret. You thought it was a heap of scrap metal just because it didn't shine like a showroom model. But this is a 1967 GT500 original build, matching VIN down to the detail, original leather upholstery, handcrafted steering wheel. This model is in the top 10 most valuable restored Mustangs on the current market. If you knew how to do a bit of research, you'd understand why it took us 5 years to get it. Kinsley froze. My mother flushed. My father leaned back slightly as if the information weighed more than the breakfast in front of him. I didn't stop. The fact that you didn't know the car's value isn't my fault, but the act of disrespecting it, leaving it out in the rain, that was destruction. I pulled out another document, photos of the car after the storm, images of the moldy interior, repair quotes from 3 major workshops. Estimated repair cost is $20,000. And that's assuming we don't have to replace the entire interior. James finally spoke, his voice low but firm. We don't want to escalate things. But if necessary, we can involve our attorney. This is a registered asset. Unauthorized relocation and damage can be grounds for prosecution. I turned to James and gave a slight nod, then looked back at my parents, calm, articulate, no longer trembling like the day before. I don't want to sue you, but I can't treat this like an accident. I need a commitment that you'll take responsibility. The air in the room felt frozen. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't plead. But everyone understood that this time, I wasn't turning away, and I wasn't returning to who I used to be. Silence hung over the living room like a heavy blanket. My father stared at the documents, clearly unable to read a single word. My mother cleared her throat, trying to cut through the thick tension, and spoke in a voice tinged with irritation and confusion. "So, what? You mean we have to pay?" I looked at her, not with anger anymore, but exhaustion. "Not pay. Take responsibility." Kinsley crossed her arms, leaning against the chair with a smirk. "Come on. You're acting like that car is a national treasure. No one meant to ruin anything. At worst, it was carelessness. Besides, you don't even live here anymore. Why keep your car at Mom and Dad's?" James inhaled sharply, as if ready to say something, but I raised my hand to stop him. I turned to Kinsley, facing her directly for the first time. "You're right. You never saw any value in that car, because you've never seen anything of mine as valuable." Kinsley faltered. I continued slowly. "When I got a scholarship as a kid, Mom said, Kinsley could too if she just tried harder. When I bought my first apartment, Dad said, Kinsley's applying for a loan, we have to support her first. And when I announced my engagement, the entire house went silent. But on your birthday, Mom rented out a whole restaurant." I paused, my voice cracking but not breaking. "I'm not saying this out of jealousy. I'm saying it so you understand. That car wasn't just metal. It was rare proof that I achieved something, for myself, by myself, and you dismissed it like always." My mother finally set down her teacup and looked at me, not avoiding, but not entirely remorseful either. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We just didn't think it was that serious." I nodded slowly. "Exactly. You've never thought anything related to me was serious. And that's the problem." My father stood up and walked out onto the balcony, as if unable to bear the pressure. Kinsley said nothing. No more smirks. I looked at each of them, then spoke clearly. "We've estimated the cost of recovery. 20,000 for repairs, another 5,000 for emotional damage. Total 25,000. We won't sue, won't make it public, but that amount must be paid within 6 months." James placed a printed copy with the exact numbers on the table. "We're prepared to sign a civil agreement." No one objected. No one agreed. But this silence wasn't avoidance. It was acknowledgement. I stood up and turned toward the door. At the threshold, I looked back. "One more thing. Kinsley's portion comes from her personal shopping account. That's the bare minimum of fairness." Kinsley started to protest, but my mother gently placed a hand on hers and shook her head. And in that brief moment, I realized, for the first time, my words carried weight in this house. That afternoon, on the way home, I didn't say a word. James drove in silence while I gazed out the window, the swaying trees reflecting the thoughts still unsettled in my mind. When we got home, I took off my shoes, poured a glass of water, and sat at the dining table, where the folder from that morning still lay. James sat across from me, setting his phone down. "If you change your mind, I support you suing." I nodded. "I know. But, before that, I need to make a call." I dialed an old college friend, Lauren, now a civil attorney in San Diego. She answered on the first ring. "Julia? Wow, long time. You calling now must mean something big's up." I told her everything, leaving out no detail. Lauren listened intently, occasionally murmuring an "uh-huh," never interrupting. When I finished, she paused for a few seconds, then said, "If that's how it happened, your parents could be charged with property damage, even temporary seizure, since the car was moved without consent." I bit my lip. "But I don't want to push it that far. They're still my family." "I get it, but still, family doesn't mean immunity." I sighed, nodding softly. "I just want them to understand that I'm no longer the daughter who silently endures everything." "Then, here's my advice. Propose a clear civil compensation plan with a defined deadline. You might not need to sue, but you need a written agreement. Only then will they grasp the seriousness." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence for a long time. James stood, heading to the kitchen to make coffee. The scent of warm coffee spread through our small house, the place we moved into 3 years ago, the same place where the Mustang used to rest peacefully in the old garage before we tore it down to build a home gym. I looked up at our wedding photo hanging in the hallway. My eyes paused on my own gaze in that picture. A woman full of hope, full of trust, never imagining she'd one day have to reclaim her worth from her own family. I picked up my phone, opened my email, and drafted a simple agreement, listing the compensation amount split across 6 months, including Kinsley's mandatory contribution, and stating clearly that this was a civil agreement, not a criminal charge, so long as the obligation was fulfilled. I printed 2 copies. In that moment, I felt no anger, just the certainty that I was doing the right thing, not just for the car, but for the little girl who had tried her whole life to be recognized, but was never once treated fairly. 3 days later, I returned to my parents' house, this time with 2 thoroughly reviewed agreements, not with the mindset of collecting a debt, but as someone laying new ground for how we would coexist, if we could still be called family. My mother opened the door, seemingly less tense. Kinsley was at the kitchen counter, scrolling on her phone, but still glanced at me with a guarded look. I got straight to the point. This is the agreement. Total: $25,000. $20,000 for restoring the car. $5,000 for emotional damages and accountability. Split over 6 months. I pulled out another document. In this, Kinsley is required to contribute at least $5,000 from her personal account, none of it from our parents. Kinsley exhaled sharply, about to argue, but my mother stopped her with a quick glance. I continued slowly. But there's one final condition. My father, who had stayed silent since the confrontation, looked up. I pulled out a referral form from my bag. Every weekend, for the next 3 months, all 3 of you, Mom, Dad, and Kinsley, will volunteer with me at St. Mark's Animal Shelter. Kinsley's jaw dropped. What? I looked at her. Nothing heavy, but you must be present. Real work. Cleaning dog kennels, scooping cat litter, prepping meals. The kind of things people do for beings weaker than themselves, with care and no complaints. My father frowned. What does this have to do with the car? I pressed my lips together, then answered, slow but firm, because that car was treated like garbage, just like how you viewed my worth for years. And I don't just want the money back. I want you to understand what it means to be responsible for what you dismiss. Kinsley stood up, ready to walk out, but this time, my mother spoke. Sit down. The entire room froze. She had never spoken to Kinsley like that before. Kinsley stepped back, awkwardly settling back into her seat. My mother looked at me. If we agree, after 3 months this ends, right? I nodded. I won't bring it up again. But if it's not taken seriously, I'll consider legal action. The room fell utterly silent. Then, my father spoke. All right. Just one word. But to me, it was the first time in my life he yielded not out of pride, but because he saw the real consequences. I nodded, without smiling. Every emotion, anger, sorrow, fatigue, pride, rolled together like a tide. But beneath all that, something stirred for the first time. The sense that I was taking charge of my own story. On the first Sunday morning, I stood outside the gate of St. Mark's Animal Shelter at 7:30 a.m. The air was crisp. The familiar scent of damp soil and dog fur lingered in the breeze as I stood there, hands in my coat pockets, listening to the barking echoing from the back of the shelter. About 10 minutes later, my parents' SUV pulled up. Kinsley got out first, dressed in white leggings, brand new sneakers, and a luxury hoodie. She yawned, like she'd just been forced out of bed. My father followed, his face tightened like a man sent somewhere he didn't belong. My mother wore sunglasses and carried a green detox bottle. They didn't greet anyone, just walked in silently, like they were serving some high-end attention. I directed them to meet the shelter supervisor, Mrs. Jane, a stout woman in her 50s, silver-haired, sharp-eyed yet kind, who assigned them their tasks without flinching. My father was to clean the back kennels, my mother to prepare meals for abandoned cats, and Kinsley to wash all the blankets and towels in storage room 2, then replace the bedding for the puppies. I saw Kinsley about to protest, but when she looked at me, standing there with arms crossed, saying nothing, she simply turned away in silence. During those early visits, I hardly heard a kind word from any of them. My father muttered curses when small dogs jumped on him. My mother was flustered when a cat knocked over a food tray. Kinsley complained, "There are more dog blankets than I own clothes." But by the second week, something began to shift. I saw my father kneel halfway down and quietly stroke a 3-legged dog, his eyes softening. I saw my mother asking about the health of a skeletal cat, the one she had once called demonic, and Kinsley. In the third week, I caught her holding an abandoned puppy, whispering, "If you were a car, you'd probably get dumped on the street too, like the Mustang." That sentence made me stop, not because it was poetic, but because I didn't expect her to remember the car's name. By the fourth week, Kinsley arrived earlier than I did. Her hair was tied up, she wore old shoes, and she brought premium dog treats, I could tell. "For the little ones," she said, avoiding my eyes. I didn't say anything. I just smiled. And that smile was real. Because for the first time in a long while, I felt that something was shifting. Not big, not dramatic, but enough to make me believe. Even the most hopeless things can change. Not when preached at, but when made to act. In the fifth week, light rain began early in the morning, the droplets settling on the shelter garage windows, casting a muted, melancholy glow. I arrived later than usual due to traffic, and when I stepped into the kennel cleaning area, I stopped. My father was crouching, not cleaning, not moving. In front of him was an old dog, blind in one eye, limping. He said nothing, just rested a hand gently on its head, slowly stroking its shaggy fur. Oddly enough, the dog that usually barked at everyone lay still beside him, burying its face into his knee like it could sense something, some distant kind of understanding. I stood behind the door. 1 minute. Then 2. I heard my father sigh quietly, then whisper, whether to the dog or to himself, I didn't know. "Back then, your grandpa and I used to drive the Mustang out to the fields. Whenever the gear jammed, he'd scold me for being clumsy. But when I fixed it, he laughed. Like a kid." I froze. I had never heard my father speak of Grandpa like that, only resentment and bitterness about how Grandpa left the family, how emotional he was. But here, in this dusty kennel, beside a frail animal, my father had uncovered a quiet corner of memory he had long hidden. Maybe, for the first time, I realized, he once loved that Mustang too. He had just buried it so deep that no one, including himself, could find it. My mother had changed too. In the prep room, I saw her picking up every scattered piece of cat food, something she used to wrinkle her nose at and have someone else clean. One afternoon, I brought her a coffee. She took it, hesitated, and said, "I'm sorry I didn't understand how important that car was to you." I didn't reply. I just looked at her face, more wrinkled now. But for the first time, her eyes didn't avoid mine. The barriers were still there. The distance still existed. But at least I was no longer a shadow on the edge of their lives. And for me, that alone felt like a meaningful step. That afternoon, as we left the shelter, my father looked at me, hesitated, then said, "If you get the Mustang fixed, can I take it for a spin?" I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I nodded. "As long as you don't jam the gears like before." We both chuckled softly. And in that moment I understood. Not everything can be perfectly repaired. But some broken pieces, if pieced back together with enough patience, can become something new. Not perfect, but real. 3 weeks later, the Mustang was towed back to our house after nearly 2 months at a restoration workshop all the way out in Riverside. The total repair bill came to exactly $19,900. Every detail of the leather interior was restored. The frame, thoroughly inspected. The midnight blue paint gleamed like the first time I ever saw it 5 years ago. But what made my chest tighten wasn't the shine. It was the piece of old felt left intact beneath the floor mat behind the driver's seat, where Grandpa once kept a small notebook, scribbled with a few lines of slanted, shaky handwriting. James opened the garage door for the crew to reverse the Mustang in, not into my parents' garage anymore, but into our own. Over the last 2 months, James and I had quietly renovated the space. What was once a cluttered storage room was now a dry, secure garage with its own alarm system, automatic door, and dehumidifier. I used every cent of the $5,000 in compensation from my parents to install cameras, sensors, and a certified theft-proof lock. James hung a small wooden sign on the corner wall. Here, things are valued. I stood there staring at the Mustang resting silently under soft white lights. No more dents, no more mold, no trace of damp. But something still lingered, as if to remind me that I had once been dismissed, once lost something precious, and I didn't choose to retaliate by destroying anything. I chose to rebuild, stronger, smarter, and more sovereign. That evening, when James asked if I wanted to take the car for a spin, I nodded. But before I got in, I opened my phone and sent my mom a message. "The car's back. I'm okay. Thank you for keeping your promise." There was no immediate reply. But I didn't wait, because for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's approval to know I was right. On a windy Thursday afternoon, I sat across from my parents in a small room painted in soft, neutral beige. A round analog clock ticked quietly on the wall behind the therapist, Marlene, a middle-aged woman with bright eyes and a gentle but firm voice. This was our first therapy session after the agreement was finalized. I didn't expect much, but I still came, because deep down, I knew if these unsaid things remained unsaid, they would continue to hurt me. And others. My father sat upright, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the floor. My mother had her arms crossed, her gaze unfocused, drifting out the window. We had sat in silence for 10 minutes, until Marlene offered a simple prompt. Each of you may share a memory, anything at all related to that Mustang. Strangely, my father was the first to speak. He didn't look at anyone, just spoke in a low, dry voice. "When I was Julia's age, I once snuck Grandpa's Mustang out of the garage at night. Didn't ask for permission. Just wanted to feel free. That night, the car slipped on a dirt road. I dented the right fender. The next morning, Grandpa saw it. Didn't yell. Didn't hit me. He just stood there for a long time and sighed." He paused, closing his eyes. That feeling was shameful, but not because I got caught, because I betrayed the trust of the only person who never asked me to be someone else. The room fell silent. I tightened my grip on my knee, never having heard him speak of Grandpa with anything resembling gratitude. My mother spoke next, a little hesitant. "I never really liked old cars. They reminded me of things I couldn't control, but I was wrong to impose that onto my daughter." She turned to me, her eyes not sharp but more sincere than I had ever seen. "I'm sorry for not understanding you. Not just about the car, about everything, all this time." I didn't reply immediately. Something in me cracked, softly, like frost thawing under the first warmth of spring. I swallowed hard, then spoke, slowly. "I don't need you to be perfect, I just need you to see me as a person, not a faded version of Kinsley, not the obedient daughter. Just Julia." Marlene smiled. No one clapped. No one cried. But the air in the room had changed. Lighter, more open. And for the first time in a long while, I walked away from a conversation with my parents not feeling small, but feeling whole. On a Sunday morning in early April, sunlight streamed through the living room window, casting a soft glow across the cream-colored walls like a thin blanket. I stood in the kitchen, making coffee. James was out in the garage, checking the Mustang's tire pressure, his unchanging weekend ritual since the car was restored. Light jazz floated from an old Bluetooth speaker, blending with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the faint, new leather smell. Our house wasn't big, but it was clean, tidy, and most importantly, ours. No one could decide for me anymore what I should keep or let go. No one could pull anything, material or emotional, out of my life again. In recent weeks, James and I had talked about expanding our living space. He suggested turning the back storage area into a small, creative corner, where I could design, write, and do the things that made me feel most like me. I agreed. But I added one more idea. To hang the photo of Grandpa sitting on the Mustang, the only one we had left, now color restored. To remind us that all good things need preserving, I said. James nodded. We no longer spoke much about what happened with my family. Not because we forgot, but because we didn't need it to repeat. My parents still text occasionally, short messages, a bit hesitant. Mom sent a picture of a cat adopted from the shelter. Dad sent a link to an article about vintage cars. Kinsley hadn't changed completely, but at least she'd stopped measuring everything by price tags and brand names. I didn't need them to change for me. I just needed them to know. Moving forward, I wouldn't nod silently at everything anymore. That afternoon, James asked if I wanted to drive the Mustang out to the countryside, the route Grandpa used to take. I nodded. We got in, closed the doors, the engine roared to life with that familiar growl. But this time, it felt different. No longer just a car filled with memories. It was a symbol of resolve, of boundaries reset, and of a future that didn't depend on anyone's permission. One Saturday afternoon, I stopped by the local grocery store to pick up some snacks for our weekend picnic. While standing at the self-checkout station, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure at the next register. Kinsley. No designer dress, no high heels, no bright red lipstick. Just a girl in a worn hoodie, faded jeans, holding a bag of cat litter and a few cans of dog food. She fumbled with the barcode scanner, awkward in a way that felt strangely new. I didn't say anything. Not to avoid her, but to watch. For the first time, I saw Kinsley without the wall between us. She wasn't the golden girl of the family anymore, or the one always prioritized at every dinner and in every family plan. She was just someone learning to care for something outside of herself, even if it was just a stray cat. When she finished checking out, I stepped up to my register. She turned her head. Our eyes met for a moment that stretched endlessly. No apologies, no tears. Just a small, subtle nod, but enough for me to know. She saw me. Not as a shadow in the shared house, not as the sister who always preached, but as Julia, the woman who kept the Mustang, the one who dared to say no, the one who kept going without needing anyone to lead the way. When I walked out to the parking lot, the rain had just stopped. The setting sun laid a golden sheet across the car hood. I opened the door and sat in the driver's seat. A light breeze swept through, carrying the scent of sunshine, old leather, and a quiet, warm kind of memory. I didn't know what the future would hold. But I no longer needed to. Because I had learned the most important thing. Not everyone has to understand, for me to deserve respect. On an early summer evening, as the sky dimmed and a cool breeze swept through the backyard, I sat alone in the garage, now no longer just a place for parking, but a sacred space of stillness amid life's chaos. The Mustang rested there, silent and proud. The overhead light cast a soft glow across its hood, reflecting a deep midnight blue like the surface of a still lake. I opened the driver's door and slid into the seat. That familiar feeling returned, like coming back to myself after a long journey warped by expectations and favoritism. On the dashboard, I'd placed Grandpa's old technical notebook, still with its slanted handwriting, some ink smudged, some notes marked in red pen. Careful with the brakes on steep hills. Don't let anyone tell you you're not good enough to handle this car. I smiled, not because of the memories, but because I now understood. What I'd been protecting was never just a car. It was a piece of my identity, something no one had the right to remove just because they couldn't see its worth. I picked up my phone and typed a short entry into my journal. Some things don't need to be understood to be valuable. Some boundaries don't need approval to be worth defending. And some wounds, if we dare to face them, will teach us how to take the wheel of our own lives. I don't know if I'll ever share these words with anyone, but I know if one day someone asks me, "Why did you keep that car, even after it was once thrown away?" I'll answer simply, because it was the first time I chose to stay with myself. Not every car is just metal and engine, and not every wound needs a scream to be heard. Sometimes, simply standing firm, protecting what others don't understand, don't believe in, or deliberately try to trample, is already a powerful act of reclaiming yourself. My story isn't just about a Mustang. It's about value, about boundaries, and about the courage to no longer endure in silence. And you, what have you had to protect in your life, even when no one stood with you? Leave a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if you believe someone else might need to hear this too, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Because maybe, just maybe, the very thing you choose to protect today will become the light that leads someone else tomorrow.